to welcome to the stage my colleague, Carlos Monje, who is Undersecretary of Transportation for the United States of America. Carlos, please.
Thank you, Annie. Good afternoon and welcome to the Ocean Pavilion. On behalf of the Department of Transportation for the U.S., I'm pleased to open this event on decarbonizing international shipping. I want to express deep thanks to the pavilion organizers, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. The pavilion is beautiful. We were just talking about what a beautiful space it is, and that there's a theater right behind us that you can sit down and get some relief from the heat. But really, its focus is highlighting the fundamental role of oceans to climate and the importance of science-based solutions to informed policy decisions. This event weaves together science and policy, education and workforce training, and climate and biodiversity, which are all intimately linked as part of ocean health. Earlier this year, the International Maritime Organization took a big step forward on decarbonization. As Secretary Buttigieg shared in his video remarks released during the IMO Assembly, the United States strongly supports the progress made with the 2023 IMO greenhouse gas strategy, which includes a well-to-wake life cycle approach to emissions. Getting the science right on life cycle analysis and several other critical policy questions in the IMO strategy is tremendously important for the maritime sector to help achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature goal. Woven into the discussions are the linkages between technologies that can improve efficiency and at the same time reduce emissions from ships, including emissions of underwater noise. Technologies such as alternative fuels and energies as well as new ship designs are going to be key to that success. This morning we announced a preview of the U.S. Maritime Decarbonization Action Plan. The preview is available right now at transportation.gov, and it highlights the decarbonization pathways for maritime industry and how the U.S. federal government is ready to help lead the way. The action plan will outline how the federal government seeks to accelerate the transition to clean options in maritime through the deployment of zero-emission fuels, technologies, energies, and vessels, positioning ports for decarbonization, strengthening the maritime workforce, and supporting inclusive collaborations. We expect to release the full action plan early next year as part of our continued work on the U.S. National Blueprint for Transportation Decarbonization. That decarbonization blueprint is the landmark strategy for our country for cutting all greenhouse emissions from the transportation sector by 2050. Meeting climate goals in the maritime sector will require scientific and engineering breakthroughs supported by industry and educational institutions. And the workforce that will implement those breakthroughs will need training as well as safeguards for security and safety. This event builds on a number of events, and I understand there's been an unprecedented number of events focused on oceans and on maritime decarbonization. But we had one earlier this morning at 8:30 that was focused on decarbonization that looked at finance and investment, community engagement, and maritime workforce, as well as supply chain resilience. While that event focused on many of the right now needs for this sector, this event right now is an opportunity to have our eyes on the horizon. Here we will discuss how to integrate the next generation, their ideas and their passion for science and the oceans and the broader maritime and shipping decarbonization dialogue. These are the future policymakers, and our future is indeed in their hands. It is my great honor now to welcome Dr. Filimon Manoni, who is the Pacific Ocean Commissioner, to provide opening remarks. Dr. Manoni.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. And good afternoon and welcome to all of us here today. First of all, Bula Vinaka, Yakwe, and greetings to all of you. And indeed, a great honor to be part of the event today. In the Pacific, we are faced with many unique challenges in terms of the transition to green shipping and what that would require. It would require significant investment. At this point, the Marshall Islands, the Kiribati, Solomon Islands, Kingdom of Tonga, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu established the Pacific Blue Shipping Partnership to lead the way in the commitments to reducing fossil fuel and use to align that with global goals for sustainable shipping, contributing to the fight against climate change. I do remain optimistic about the positive impact of the initiative on the region's maritime transport sector and, of course, on the broader vision for a sustainable and resilient Blue Pacific and the globe. Last year at the UN Oceans Conference in Lisbon, Portugal, we as the Pacific were reminded, or we reminded the hosts that in fact it was a fitting event and a juncture where we joined the world in Lisbon, some 500 years after the great Portuguese navigator sailed the globe through the Pacific. And what seemed a formidable achievement then for the world was, in fact, quite a routine matter for our ancestors in the Pacific, who traversed all parts of the Pacific in their sail, aided merely by traditional knowledge, the stars and the suns and the current and all of that. But it is due to the fact that I am here with a beam of hope that initiatives such as the Blue Pacific Shipping Partnership against this history should remind all of us the importance also of embracing and preserving the rich cultures that our forefathers have developed, the traditional knowledge and our own way of life. We cannot dispute the fact that despite our efforts, global emergency facing our oceans continues to persist. Sea levels are rising, our oceans is getting warmer, more acidic, marine pollution, overfishing are just but the number of challenges that we have to address. These elements no doubt threaten our survival, the boundaries of our exclusive economic zones and future of our countries. And if you have looked at the communiques of the Pacific Island Forum leaders in the past couple of years, that the Pacific has endorsed quite a number of initiatives looking ahead to how international law could help us resolve these issues. Our past and present have depended on the ocean. Today, of course, maritime transport is still at the heart of our ocean identities, with 90% of trade of goods still carried by shipping. It is a big part of our way of life. How can we use all the brain power that we have to work on strategies that help change these enablers of bad outcomes and make them solutions for good outcomes into the future? As growing up, I remember I come from a very small island, the arrival of cargo vessels to my home island, and it was a celebrated event because we were so isolated that vessels would come in 6 months at a time. And that was how people lived those days. And without the understanding of the impacts of fossil fuel and burning fuels would have on their lives. But I find comfort in knowing that the shipping industry is working on how to balance its social, environment, and economic costs and benefits. My own country, the government of the Marshall Islands, is doing what it can as a considerable flag state, both at the global IMO level as well as at the regional level, to address some of these issues. We can look at our own history, our own engineering ingenuity to contribute to the solution. We also need, however, to take what is truly rooted in the spirit of our own sustainable development. In 2021, the forum leaders also called for sustainable and resilient development of the maritime industry, including the investment in new technology, operations to ensure safe, accessible, affordable maritime transport, which contributes to our global obligations. Transport ministers in Samoa in 2019 also echoed similar calls for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping, as well as taking steps at the domestic level to contribute to that goal. They requested the implementation of consistent programs addressing the need for data, policy, laws, and technology, finance to support the effort toward this, what might seem as ambitious for the Pacific, but with the help of all of us and partners, and I think we can take this a long way. So, thank you again for the opportunity to say a few words this afternoon and to share with you what some of the thinking in the region, and that we continue to look forward to real partnerships, not only for the benefit of the Pacific, but for our globe, for our world, for our oceans, and to win this battle that we are seeking to address against climate change. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Hello, everyone. I'm Margaret Leinen. I'm the director of Scripps Institution of Oceanography and vice chancellor of the University of California, San Diego. And I'm going to be moderating the fireside chat portion of this session. And thank you, Dr. Manoni, for reminding us that the navigators were very sustainable, very gentle on the ocean. And hopefully, with the efforts that are underway and the commitments that everybody wants to make to decarbonize shipping, we may get to somewhat closer to that gentle approach to the ocean. I'm going to be joined today for this portion of the program by Annie Petzonk from U.S. Department of Transportation and Co Barrett from NOAA. And please join me up here, and then we're going to have a conversation. And I'm going to start, but yes. So, agency cooperation. I'm going to start by asking both Annie and Co to introduce the range of what they do, because both of them have very complex roles that have a lot of connections. And I want you to know a little bit about what they actually bring to this conversation. So I'll start with you, Annie.
Thanks so much, and thanks for all the great work you do at Scripps and for the terrific sponsorship of the Oceans Pavilion here. I am the Assistant Secretary for the Aviation and International Affairs Office in the Department of Transportation. And that office has two main functions. First, we coordinate all of the department's international engagements. So there are bodies that create standards for internationally across our different modes of transportation, for cars, for planes, and for ships. And so we coordinate the department's participation in the International Maritime Organization. And my colleague Marcella Norsworthy here just came from London from the IMO assembly that's going on right now. We also handle the department's role in the economic regulation of aviation. So the safety functions are in the Federal Aviation Administration, and we, in our office, license airlines. We negotiate with foreign governments to establish what are called open skies agreements that allow air travel between our countries. So we handle that part of things. And having one ear on the aviation side and the other on the maritime side has been very helpful, because these are, aviation and maritime, the two hard to decarbonize sectors, because it's really hard to run a big ship or a big airplane on anything other than a liquid fuel. And that's a common challenge that both sectors face as they move to decarbonization. And so having some grounding in how each sector is approaching the challenge can help each sector learn from the other.
Great. Thanks, Annie. Co.
Hello, everyone. I'm Co Barrett. I'm the Senior Advisor for Climate at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the U.S. And that's the federal agency with a stewardship mission for oceans, coasts, weather, fisheries. But we're also a part of the Department of Commerce. So we do have a connection with commercial opportunities, economic opportunities, which is why this session on green shipping is kind of a nice confluence of our investments. The bulk of what we do in NOAA is focused on ocean protection. We produce a lot of climate research and provide climate services. But this aspect of our work is a new and important focus. We have our own ocean-going fleet. We have the particular challenge that our boats are on the ocean for many months at a time, sometimes because we have an ocean exploration mission, a mapping mission. We do lots of fisheries coordination work. So that presents, I think, a particular challenge when we think about green shipping. As Annie, you said, the sector writ large is, kind of hard to abate emissions, but think about what it takes to sustain, say, a net zero fleet if you are constantly on the ocean and also visiting ports that are fairly remote. But as part of the federal government, we are committed to our climate action plan and to reducing our GHG emissions to net zero by 2050.
Great, thank you. And Co, would you also say a little bit about your role in IPCC?
Oh, okay, yeah. I should have said that because I'm so proud of that. I just rotated off as a vice chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate, which is the UN body that produces these periodic assessments to help us all understand what's going on in the climate system. And I'm particularly proud of that role because I was the champion for the first ever special report to look at oceans and the cryosphere in a changing climate. And I'm proud of it because it's part of a number of actions from many of you in this office that have helped to, in this room, that have helped to get oceans onto the climate agenda here, which is so important for all of those communities that depend on oceans and also all the opportunities that the ocean can contribute to the climate solution. It's, the ocean is a sponge for excess heat and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and we really need to be paying attention to it in this forum.
Yes. I don't know if we would have an ocean pavilion without that report, affectionately known as the SROC. And that the transmission of that report and then its adoption, the ocean climate dialogue that was requested as a result of it, has really opened this entire discussion. So thank you very much. So we've talked about how difficult this is. Annie, can you tell us about how the Department of Transportation is handling the challenge of, are you advising, are you encouraging, are you investing? What are you doing to help move this along toward decarbonization of shipping?
Thanks. Well, first, we are a proud part of the federal family. So our maritime administration, which is one of our modes of transportation, which reports up to the Secretary of Transportation, our maritime administration is deeply engaged on the science, technology, and economics of decarbonizing the shipping sector. But the activity is not limited to MARAD. For example, last week, our Federal Transit Administration announced a grant program to electrify ferries in the inland fleet of the United States, that is, in ships that ply waters within the United States, not the international fleet. But that's a very exciting program, and there's a lot of opportunity there for decarbonization in terms of our ferry fleet in the United States. We're part of the federal family, so we work with all other agencies in the interagency process, and through that, we have worked with other agencies to develop a blueprint for decarbonizing the aviation sector. Sorry, the transportation sector. The aviation, I keep saying aviation because it just came from an aviation event. Sorry, the transportation decarbonization blueprint is on our website, and we have a specific chapter on maritime. Today, just today, we've issued a 2-page summary of the in-depth plan that we anticipate issuing next year for maritime decarbonization. We also cooperate with other agencies in terms of the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, as I said, and their Marcella's work was particularly important in the interagency process in developing the U.S. position, which then became the IMO position, for looking at maritime fuels on a life cycle basis. And that's really important because if we're going to ensure that nations like the Republic of the Marshall Islands and Fiji, which are so dependent on maritime connectivity, but also threatened by the impact of climate change, can continue to have that maritime connectivity, but in a more sustainable way, we must make sure that the new fuels that ships use in a decarbonizing maritime sector actually reduce emissions. And the only way that you can make sure that those fuels do that is to look comprehensively from, as we say, well to wake through the entire life cycle of the fuel process to make sure that overall, if we switch to new fuels, we're going to do so to help address climate. We also are very interested in the biodiversity linkages. I know there's some great work going on quieter ships. And quieter ships are really important not only for protecting ocean biodiversity, but also for improving efficiency so we can get a double or triple benefit in terms of greater efficiency, reduced emissions, and protection for wildlife. And so we are very eager to learn from our sister agencies on that, and to the extent that we're involved in standard setting for safety and environment on board ship, we're engaged across those disciplines.
Great, thanks, Annie. You come, as you highlighted, you come from an agency that actually operates ocean-going vessels for oceanography and research as opposed to marine trade. But how is NOAA looking at this issue of decarbonizing your fleet?
Yeah, well, we're looking at this kind of in a kind of three-pronged approach. One, how can we right now improve our efficiency measures on ship, but also on shore, right? Because we have an opportunity at our facilities to, be looking at ways to kind of decarbonize and reduce our carbon footprint. We are bringing 4 new ships on board in the next couple of years, so we're looking to develop innovative technologies to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from these ships. Right now, because we are out on the water for such a long time, our ships often will spend 1,500 gallons of diesel a day out on our oceanographic missions. So we're really looking to, especially in our new ships, use new innovative technologies that'll help us. So hybrid, electric, diesel generation. But just because we all know this is a hard-to-abate sector, where the technology is on this is really maybe that's going to improve like 20% efficiency for us. So a piece of our strategy really has to be, how are we also building those ships to be able to evolve as technology evolves? Can we retrofit these ships in mid-lifetime in order to keep up with the innovation that we hope will emerge? So that's the second kind of prong for us. But of course, because we have a broad ocean mission, this is all within an integrated strategy of ocean stewardship. So Annie, you mentioned, and Carlos, you also mentioned this issue of underwater noise. Well, that's an area where NOAA is doing a fair amount of research, and the emerging research shows, although it's hard to tell for, say, whales and things, that there are impacts from underwater noise in terms of impacts to the social relationships of large marine mammals, sensing predators, finding food. So the degree to which, as Annie said, we can find strategies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, improve energy efficiency, and reduce underwater noise is a win-win-win for us, right? And I think our particular role here is to kind of bring that science to bear as we are evolving our mitigation technologies, to keep people aware that this is all happening within a robust ecosystem that we really need to take care of.
Yes, we're at Scripps. We're very well aware of that. How much diesel we are burning every day, and our head of marine operations is sitting in the audience, and he always says he emits more CO2. Well, we have a large oceanographic research vessel fleet, and he emits more CO2 than any other part of the whole University of California system. Virtually, yes, his ship. So he has been working over the last decade to look into alternatives, and we worked with Sandia National Labs on feasibility of hydrogen. And we found that while it was feasible to do hydrogen for really open ocean, across to the Western Pacific, et cetera, you wound up having to have a very large vessel. So we then looked into a replacement for our regional West Coast vessel. And we will next year begin construction of a hybrid hydrogen vessel. We expect to be able to do 75% of our mission work entirely on hydrogen. The very important co-benefits, in addition to quiet, is the lack of pollution. So we were actually working with the California Air Resources Board because this would also substantially reduce the emission of all nitrogen species, particulates, et cetera. And although they're emitted in the coastal ocean environment, they immediately move inland, and those are of course human health benefits as well. And then just in terms of pollution, no oil spills. If there's a spill of hydrogen, it combines with oxygen, and or it goes directly to the stratosphere in about 30 seconds. So that's our own experience, but one of the things that we are really looking at is the activities of the major shipping companies and sort of drafting behind them as they innovate in this space.
Margaret, there's another point I wanted to make. You were reminding me, on a visit to Scripps, I was so impressed with the data visualization capabilities that you have. And I raise that because, yes, we should, in addressing these green shipping issues, be looking to improve the efficiency of our fleet, but we also have this amazing opportunity to get fewer ships out there because we can connect to shore and bring researchers into the environment without actually having to be on a ship. And so just even thinking, innovatively beyond improvements to a specific ship's functioning, there are technological ways to engage researchers, to engage folks as if they were on a ship, but they're actually on land.
Right. Absolutely.
And just to follow on that, this point about improving efficiency, I think, is a really powerful one. And Carlos mentioned, and the department has launched something called the Freight Logistics Optimization Work, or FLOW, which allows shippers to communicate with each other and share information with the department about who's shipping what where. That's information that shippers historically jealously guarded. They regarded that as confidential trade secrets, etc. But it turns out to be really important for handling operations at ports. And we saw this during the pandemic very vividly when we had as many as 100 ships off the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, which you saw, just idling because we didn't have the space in the port, we didn't have the coordination of whose ship should come in when, and it was a huge problem. And through this program, FLOW, we are allowing shippers who want to engage, it's totally voluntary, but if they want to share information about what they're shipping, where, when, then they get access to the information about who else is shipping what, where, when, that can allow them to time their shipments in a way that makes much more sense for efficiency. It smooths out the operation at the ports so we don't have a situation where we have ships idling for days off our ports, just increasing pollution. Of course, we're also working closely with our ports on looking at things like cold ironing, enabling the ship to come in and connect to electricity. If we're going to connect the ship to electricity so it doesn't sit in port burning diesel, then we need to make sure we have sufficient electrons, not only electrons, but green electrons. And that means we need to be looking in a systemic way across the electricity needs, the port needs, and one thing that we haven't touched on yet, which I'm going to prompt us to touch on if that's okay, the labor force, the workforce needs. So let me tee that one up, if I may take the liberty of doing that, and then hand it back to you.
Yes, absolutely. Just before this, I was talking with one of our California senators who's very interested in developing the workforce for hydrogen. And exactly as you were saying, she's very interested in what kinds of workforce development we have to do to accomplish that. So I want to, California was one of the successful bidders to be one of the hydrogen hubs. So that's another agency. We don't have DOE here on the stage, but in what way is Department of Commerce and NOAA and DOT combining or leveraging the impact of these developments in Department of Energy?
First, I'm really proud that we in the Biden administration now have a memorandum of understanding working in partnership with the Department of Energy. We've set up a joint office which has funding and is able to bring the expertise of the Department of Transportation and the Department of Energy together on exactly questions like how can we enable hydrogen to become a major fuel source for shipping. And so we were just together with Jeff Marudian, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office, and he was talking about the hydrogen hubs and the California successful bid to become a hydrogen hub. This means that we need to be sharing information about starting first and foremost with safety, which is our North Star, to make sure that when ships are going to turn to hydrogen as a fuel source, they do so safely for the workers, safely for the communities around the port, and of course, safely for the cargo. So that safety is a first and overriding priority, but also one of the things we see as a difference between the aviation sector and the maritime sector is the following. In the aviation sector, there's an international body, the International Civil Aviation Organization, that develops standards that are used across the entire international civil aviation spectrum. When you get on a plane here in Dubai, whether you're flying to the United States or China or Europe, wherever you're going, you don't worry about whether the bolt that holds the engine onto the wing of the aircraft was made according to Chinese specifications or UAE specifications or United States specifications. There is one rule, one standard for that. And those standards apply across the entire international civil aviation sector. So we have in that sector standards for sustainable aviation fuels, including those that can be dropped into today's existing aircraft. We don't have that level of standardization yet in the International Maritime Organization, nor for the domestic inland fleet. So it's a challenge. We've got to figure it out. I think we can do it together, but it's going to require some very complex analyses and decisions. If you have a hydrogen ship that's trying to dock in a port that's already decided to be an ammonia port, you've got a problem. So we're going to have in this very capital-intensive sector with long-lived capital stock, the technologies and the planning to be able to make those transitions in a coordinated way.
Yeah, I'm learning so much from you, Annie. So happy I'm on this panel. Just to go back to the workforce issue, because so we in NOAA have a passionate workforce when it comes to working on ocean issues. The most passionate people in NOAA, I believe, are working on ocean. And some of them, when they were small children, knew they wanted to be a marine biologist, right? It's just a passion. So I would like to see us figuring out a way to also embrace this piece of the marine equation as we engage the next generation in the workforce. Now we have Sea Grant colleges, and I don't know if you know that. We have land grant colleges in the U.S. Well, we have Sea Grant colleges in every coastal state. And so we bring those fellows into the U.S. government to do a policy fellowship after they've achieved, in most cases, a PhD. And it's a wonderful way for them to apply their scientific knowledge to a policy context. In fact, most of the leadership in NOAA has been a Sea Grant fellow. Now, I haven't been, but a lot of our leadership has come through this program, so it's very powerful. I would love to see us starting to build this workforce of the future by engaging colleges to work with us on these green shipping and kind of ocean-based mitigation efforts. We do have some scholarships that are specifically focused, the Nancy Foster Scholarship, focused to help us bring women scientists in particular, underrepresented folks. And let me just say this, because this is an issue I'm very passionate about. If we're going to innovate, we need to bring everybody into that innovation conversation, which includes women, people from the global south, because we need every perspective and every voice helping us to solve this really challenging problem.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Co. Really important point. You referred to the fact that, Annie, that our ships, the infrastructure was long-lived. So in the research community, we build a ship that we say will have a 30-year lifetime, and then we do a midlife refit somewhere between 15 and 20 years and operate it for 40. So we're trying to guess how this whole fuel situation will evolve and try to prepare to be able to pivot. How do you see the role of the big shipping companies, which are already moving and deciding for themselves what fuel they're going to use, versus governments thinking strategically about a broader array of marine shipping and what fuel is going to use, what fuel we're going to use? Should we be following the first movers? Should we be waiting for, word from that's more strategic, like the partnership with DOE? They have views about the future too.
Margaret, you have identified the fundamental question from my perspective. And I think we cannot address this question without engagement of communities, because local communities will have strong views on what fuels they want to have be used in their ports. Earlier this year, we were with the Secretary of Transportation visiting the port of Yokohama in Japan. Yokohama, they've made a decision. They're going to be able to fuel all of the above. They're building an ammonia port. They're building a hydrogen port. They're building for each of the methanol for each of these major fuel types. That's a pretty unusual example, I think. And I think that certainly we've heard from a number of our ports in the United States that are consulting with local communities to see what the community's preferences are. Because if we go ahead with, let's say, a government edict of it's going to be a certain fuel, or if the private sector goes forward and says, okay, this is the fuel we're going to use, get ready for it, and the local community says, no, that's actually not what we want, at least in the United States, it's going to be very challenging to move forward. So I think we really need the engagement with our local communities, and we see that island communities want to engage their local populations in terms of what fuels are going to be the low carbon and zero emitting fuels of the future.
And I'm looking at our colleague from the Marshall Islands because, you know, it seems like there's power to be had in these regional collaborations in setting these kinds of things, right? So how do you gather your local communities in a way to help inform this whole dialogue?
Actually, if I could mention one more thing in that regard, we're seeing a wonderful set of experimentation happening with the green shipping corridors initiatives that are developing around the world. We've got one that we're working with Canada on for Great Lakes shipping. We've got another where we're talking with the UK on a green shipping corridor. And it is, I think, through these green shipping corridor initiatives that local communities begin to be engaged on this in a way that is very tangible, very real, and also brings, frankly, investors to the table because they're going to have views as well.
So many who operate ships want to do the right thing in terms of repowering, but it's going to cost a lot of money. And then, at least for the immediate future, we're probably going to pay a premium for fuels that are low-emission fuels. What is DOT and maybe the other agencies thinking about in terms of how we finance this transition?
The Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law have given us some very important tools through things like port development. We have a certain amount of grant money available and loan money, and we also have programs in the Department of Transportation, and Carlos is much more expert on these than I am, and so I might hand the microphone over to you, but we have programs that support financing of major infrastructure projects, including both grants and loans. And also, I think part of the finance question is one that you raised, Co, which is who's going to maintain, who's going to install, who's going to maintain these ships and the port infrastructure. And there we have some very interesting work. We have the Maritime Administration's Marine Environmental and Technical Assistance Program, or META, under MARAD's auspices. And Co, we're very interested in the idea that you mentioned in terms of you've got the terrific Sea Grant programs. You've got, I think it's called the Canals Fellowship Program as well. And we have our own, the Merchant Marine Academy as well in New York. And how can we take these educational institutions that we support or are engaged with and orient them to this terrific challenge?
Yeah, great point for the maritime academies. A few days ago, Secretary Kerry said that technology solutions exist for decarbonizing shipping, and what we need is collective will. Are there any, we've talked about some impediments along the way. Are there any impediments that we haven't discussed? So we talked about, which fuel is it going to be? How are we going to prepare long-term for the evolution of these vessels? We talked about workforce. Any others?
Well, I think there's a great need for further research, right? We're going to be learning a whole lot as we engage this experiment, both about the ways we can protect the marine environment in light of these changes. Hopefully, the improvements will improve our achievement towards net zero, but also help us to improve ecosystem health. But there's going to be a lot of research opportunities there to help us to provide those findings so that it can feed into this kind of motivation loop that helps people to see that we are making a difference with the changes, not only for the climate, but also for the marine environment. So I think optimistically there's a lot of interesting research that can be done there.
I'll add two challenges that are also opportunities. First, building a port requires a lot of stuff, like a lot of concrete, a lot of pavement, and we have an opportunity to make sure that that infrastructure is done itself in the most climate-friendly way possible. And that's where the department has initiatives looking at things like low-carbon paving. What does that mean? The transportation sector is the largest emitting sector in the United States. The industrial sector is 22% of our emissions. I think it's the third largest sector. A lot of the industrial sector's emissions come from making stuff for the transportation sector to put in terms of infrastructure. So collectively, the transportation sector is really responsible for a lot of emissions. We have an opportunity as we think through the design of the new infrastructure for the new fuels, new approaches to ocean shipping, to make sure that that infrastructure is done in as climate-friendly a way as possible. Secondly, as we all know, sea levels are rising, climate impacts are happening, and we have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure that that infrastructure is put in the most resilient, climate-resilient way possible.
Great. We have a few minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience?
Thank you. Hello. Thank you all for coming to speak with us. My name is Annie. I'm a student at Duke University, and I actually research the shipping industry, so I'm very glad that we're having this talk right now. I'm just wondering, I know that the United States has a lot of restrictions on our shipbuilding capacity, specifically with the Jones Act, and how, different restrictions make it so then our ships do have to be built and sourced within the United States and those materials. So I would love to know, in terms of building a resilient fleet for the future, how we can try to address that within the current legislative environment that we're operating in, and furthermore, whether we think that there can be further partnerships to collaborate on with our partners in Asia and Europe, for example. Thank you.
Sounds like a great graduate thesis topic. We would welcome that kind of thinking and input. And one of the things that in the department, we have a section of the department called the Volpe Research Center. And the Volpe Center, based in Boston, has teams of researchers who assist the department on key questions. And one of the things that the Volpe Center has done is created a tool, very interesting tool, you can find it on the web, called the Fuel Transportation Optimization Tool, or FTOT, F-T-O-T. And it allows you to look, if you need fuel in the United States for something, it allows you to look at what's the most efficient way to get that fuel to the place you need to get it. That kind of thinking could be adapted by researchers to look at what's the most efficient way to build new ships in the United States, and where would we get the materials, and how can we do so in the most climate-friendly way, as I mentioned. So it's a great area for research, and I think the job creation potential there is quite significant.
Any other questions? Any other theses being studied out there? If not, Co and Annie, thank you so much for joining us. And now we're going to be joined by Jose Julio Casas, who is the Secretary General of the Eastern Tropical Marine Corridor. Sorry, I had an abbreviation. I didn't know whether it was convening or corridor, CMAR. And you're going to be joining us for concluding remarks. Thank you so much.
So thank you. Thanks. I want to thanks to the U.S. Department of Transportation for convening this event. I appreciate the opportunity to provide my perspective on this important topic. My name, as you say, is Jose Julio Casas. I'm from Panama. Panama, as you know, is the largest shipping flag state in the world. We are also recognized and respected internationally for our leadership in commitment to protecting and preserving ocean health and marine biodiversity. When I think about the question posed by this event, can shipping help save the ocean? I think the answer is actually right. It's yes, he can. Panama is a carbon negative country. We give this part in implementing nature-based solutions like marine protected areas. Over 54% of our country, of our exclusive economic zone, is under some level of protection. And additionally, Panama, along with Costa Rica, Colombia, and Ecuador, manage a network of 10 MPAs known as the Eastern Tropical Marine Corridor, or CMAR, that seeks the conservation of biological biodiversity and sustainable use of marine resources throughout the implementation of ecosystem management. I'm the secretary actually from this initiative, and we in Panama has ready to take important steps to reduce the impact shipping in ecosystems. For example, we have created a special marine corridor in our exclusive economic zone where ships must reduce speed to 10 knots. This helps to avoid collisions with the humpback whales that concrete in our waters. Slowing ships also significantly reduce the level of underwater noise that harms many forms of marine life, and of course, greatly reduce the greenhouse gas emission. Thinking about how slow speed zones can be used in MPAs throughout in oceans will be a good start. We spoke today about the importance of decarbonizing the shipping industry, which is critical. I think it's equally important to raise awareness that commercial shipping is this leading source of underwater noise in the oceans today. As we move forward decarbonizing the shipping industry, we have to make sure we are building and operating ships that are both carbon-free and quiet. If we don't address underwater noise, our ocean ecosystems will not be able to thrive, and this will negatively impact on climate goals. This summer, scientists from around the world issued a call to action for governments to take action to reduce underwater noise, and Panama takes this call to action seriously. Our Ministry of Environment is already reaching out to our domestic shipping institutions to encourage encourage them to consider additional solutions that both reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other water noise. Panama also believes that we must join with the international community to work together in agreement on the need of ambitious action to better protect our ocean. Panama is already working with partners like the Natural Resource Defense Council, an international respected non-governmental organization, to look for the best opportunity to grow our global network of highly and fully protected MPAs and to ensure marine biodiversity is protected from threats like ocean noise. Reducing emissions for shipping, both air emissions and noise emissions, can provide immediately a long-term benefit to these ocean areas. As the shipping industry aims to meet a net zero greenhouse gas emission goal, we can also strengthen efforts to protect biodiversity. And we can do it with sound science, partnerships and collaboration, and a strong teaching and research. Thank you.
So thank you again to all of our speakers, and thank you all for being here at the event. And we look forward to a future with a decarbonized fleet.